If you died this week, who would actually get your super? Most people assume it just follows their will. It doesn't. Without a binding death benefit nomination, your super fund's trustee, not your will and not your family, decides who inherits your entire balance and any life insurance attached to it. This isn't a niche problem. About 6.5 million Australians currently have no binding nomination, according to Super Consumers Australia's 2023 research, cited by ABC News. Today, we'll fix it with 3 moves. Check who the law actually lets you pay, lodge a binding nomination, and map the tax for each beneficiary. Here's the number that stops people cold. 6.5 million Australians have no say over who inherits their super. Super Consumers Australia, 2023. And here's the part nobody tells you. Among those surveyed, the average balance sitting exposed was around $101,000 each, before you even count the life insurance attached. 3 moves. Check who the law lets you pay, lodge a binding nomination, and map the tax outcome for each heir. Each takes under 20 minutes and costs nothing. Here's the mechanism most people never learn. Under super law, a death benefit can only be paid to your SIS dependents, your spouse, children of any age, or someone in an interdependency relationship, or to your legal personal representative, meaning your estate. The Law Society of NSW is blunt. Super death benefits don't automatically form part of your estate, so trustees often pay dependents directly and bypass your will entirely. So who's really in charge? If you've made only a non-binding nomination or none at all, your fund's trustee uses its own discretion to decide which dependents are paid, ATO. AMP puts it plainly, if you don't nominate a beneficiary, your super fund may decide who receives your money regardless of what's in your will. A valid binding nomination flips that. It takes you from 0 control to 100% control. Now the second layer, tax. The ATO treats death benefits dependents for tax differently from general dependents. A lump sum paid to a tax dependent is tax-free, but paid to a non-tax dependent, like an independent adult child, the taxable component gets hit. AMP notes the taxed element faces up to 15% plus the 2% Medicare levy. Here's what that costs in real money. On a $101,000 taxable component paid to a non-tax dependent adult child, 15% tax is $1,550, and the 2% Medicare levy adds $2,020 AMP ATO. That's 17th of $170 skimmed straight off the inheritance. Paid instead to a tax dependent, like a financially dependent spouse, that same lump sum is tax-free and stays in the family. Let's kill the biggest myth right now. People believe their will decides who gets their super, just like everything else. The fact from the Law Society of NSW and the ATO is that super death benefits can only go to dependents or your legal personal representative. They don't automatically join your estate, and the trustee can decide. Put the two costs side by side. There's your average $101,000 balance exposed to trustee discretion, Super Consumers Australia 2023, and there's the $17,170 tax skim if it lands with the wrong heir, AMP ATO. Both are avoidable, and both come down to one form and one tax check. Meet Sarah. She's 42, a marketing manager earning $110,000 a year with $160,000 in a large industry My Super Fund and 23 years until she plans to retire at 65. She's separated, has 2 children, aged 17 and 20, no new partner, no current will, and no binding nomination. Here's what Sarah found when she looked closer. Discovery 1. And it's $410,000. Sarah had assumed her $160,000 balance plus her $250,000 default death cover would simply follow her will. Instead, the ATO and Law Society of NSW taught her that super doesn't automatically form part of her estate, so only her dependents or her legal personal representative can receive it, and without a binding nomination, the trustee decides who among them gets what. Discovery 2. 27,200. Her 20-year-old isn't financially dependent, so if Sarah dies after they're self-supporting, they're likely a non-tax dependent. If the trustee paid them $160,000 of taxable super directly, that's 15% tax of $24,000 plus a 2% Medicare levy of $3,200, AMP, ATO, $2,7200 gone, and that's before counting the insurance. Discovery 3 is the gut punch. She's in the high-risk majority. Through ABC's coverage of super consumers, Australia's research, Sarah learned only about a quarter of surveyed Australians had a legally binding nomination, while around a third had none at all. She checked her own account, found no binding nomination, and realised her full $410,000 was sitting entirely at the trustee's discretion. Run Sarah's numbers forward and the picture gets worse. If she dies in 10 years with a projected $250,000 balance and unchanged cover, the tax on the taxable component paid to non-tax dependent kids is $40,500, 15% plus 2% Medicare per AMP and the ATO, plus around $15,000 in legal friction. Grown at a 5% real return over 20 years, that's roughly $150,000 in lost family wealth, author's estimate. So could this be you? Sign 1. You've never actually filled in a beneficiary form for your super. Sign 2. You don't know whether your nomination is binding or just a non-binding wish. Sign 3. You haven't reviewed it since a divorce, a new child, or a new partner. If any of those ring true, your trustee, not you, is currently in charge. Here's the good news. Every bit of this is fixable, and it's fixable for free in an afternoon. We'll do 3 moves: confirm who the law actually lets you pay, lodge a binding nomination so the trustee has to follow your wishes, and map the tax so your money doesn't get skimmed. Do these and you go from zero control to a locked-in plan. Move 1. Check who the law lets you pay. Log into your fund and open the beneficiaries tab, then cross-check every person against the SIS dependent definitions: spouse or de facto, a child of any age, someone in an interdependency relationship, or a financial dependent, ATO. Anyone who isn't a dependent, an adult sibling or parent, can only be paid through your legal personal representative via your will. Here's how. Open the Nominations tab in your funds portal, then check each name against the SIS dependent list from the ATO. For anyone who isn't a dependent, route them through your legal personal representative and make sure your will matches. Good looks like every intended beneficiary either qualifying as a dependent or being clearly covered via your estate. Move 2. Lodge a binding death benefit nomination. First confirm your fund allows binding nominations, then complete the form naming one or more dependents and your legal personal representative with percentages that total exactly 100%. ATO, Australian Super. Have it witnessed. And remember, witnesses generally can't be beneficiaries. 3 steps. Confirm your fund offers binding rather than only non-binding nominations. Allocate 100% across your dependents or LPR and get the form witnessed. Then submit it and confirm receipt. Good looks like a valid binding nomination on file, matching your will, reviewed within the last 3 years. This is general information, not personal advice. Move 3. Map the tax for each beneficiary. In your fund portal, find your balance split into taxable and tax-free components, then list who's a tax dependent, spouse, a child under 18 versus a non-tax dependent like an independent adult child, ATO, Law Society, NSWs. For each non-tax dependent, apply 15% plus the 2% Medicare levy to estimate their hit. Here's how. Find your taxable versus tax-free breakdown. Sort your beneficiaries into tax dependents and non-tax dependents using ATO definitions. Then estimate the price if 15% plus 2% Medicare cost on the taxable part for each non-dependent, AMP. Good looks like steering large taxable components to tax dependents or through your estate. Why does this all work this way? Back in 1993, the SIS Act set the framework that limits death benefits to dependents and legal personal representatives, separating super from your ordinary estate. In 2007, simplified super tax reforms made lump sums to tax dependents tax-free, while leaving non-dependents exposed. And in 2023, research reported by ABC found 6.5 million Australians with no binding nomination. Balances are rising while control isn't keeping up. Once you've acted, verify it. You should see your nomination marked binding and valid in your online account. Confirm the allocations total 100% and that the witness signatures and dates are there. And if life changes, a divorce, a new child, a new partner, lodge a fresh form. Every number today comes from named sources: the ATO's Superannuation Death Benefits Guidance, the Law Society of Next, AMP, and Super Consumers Australia's research via ABC News. All the links are in the description below so you can check them yourself. So here's what you learned. Your will doesn't control your super. A binding nomination and a tax check do. Next week, we're breaking down binding versus non-binding nominations and which one actually holds up when it's challenged in court. If this saved you from a costly mistake, hit subscribe so the next one finds you. We read the fine print so your family doesn't get a nasty surprise, and there's a new one every week.